Welcome to the Tearing It Up podcast. I'm your host, Taryn. We'll be tearing it up, tearing it down, and tearing it apart, dissecting all things related to those who deviate from the standard. From leaders of their industry to leaders of mediocrity, and maybe a gear review or two thrown in. We shoot the shit and let the conversations flow, so if that's not your style, this may not be for you. Otherwise, listen in. Hope to light a fire in you somehow. Hello, everybody. We are back again for another Tearing It Up Thursday. You know the spiel that it might not be a Thursday that you're listening to it, but I like alliteration, so it's a Thursday that it comes out. And actually, it's a Thursday while we're recording. That never happens, but I am back today with Angie Marie. So if you guys have been listening or have gone back through the archives, you heard me talk with Angie Marie. Oh my God, it was just 1 year ago. Or was it 2? It was 2,
I think
1.5.
2.
It was like, because it was 2023. So now there's the beginning of 2025. I'm get confused with time, but it was the fall of 2023 at Swell that Tammy Jo had put on this event. We talked about that too. We showed up. I did a few interviews with people there. Andrea is one of them. And then we also did a full-on conversation on the podcast too with her. So actually, I guess then it's a couple appearances. Wait, does that mean you might be our first 3-timers?
I am honored, especially because you and I like to just dig into the juicy stuff, right? So
Yeah.
I'll be here many more times if you let me.
Yes, I love it. I love having guests on again and again because we can always touch just deeper on certain topics. So, for a little more context too, the last time Angie and I talked, we were talking about like cycles, like in life, cyclical things, like, and of course your period, because Angie just knows a lot about the in-depth, I guess, details of cycles and seasons of cycles and has ways of kind of integrating them into your life. And so I wanted to go a little bit deeper into the period talk. So out there, so you all know that's what we're diving in today. So if you feel uncomfortable at all for any reason with this topic, I actually encourage you to stay because that is kind of the premise of this conversation is how uncomfortable it can be to talk about periods still to this day, and definitely across different ages. So I, as you all may also know, or many of you, like I coach wrestling and mostly boys, but we have a couple girls. And this year, the fact that we actually had 2 girls instead of 1, well, 3, but multiple girls so that they could talk with each other, the talk of periods came up. And these are high school girls. It was very interesting. You know, I'm not a mom, I'm an aunt, but a very young children. So I haven't had this conversation or heard, much talk about it with the adolescents who are coming into puberty. So it's interesting to hear their take because I thought that maybe this day and age with all the information out there and social media and just like things are talked about more openly than they were when I was their age, that it was very much did not seem that way. They were like kind of uncomfortable. They were talking about products and what would work and what wouldn't and like ew this, ew that. And I was like, oh man, like, but thinking about it, a lot of adult women are still this way. So I wanted to dig into some conversation about different period products. There's a lot more reusable products these days. And then also just kind of best practices for when you are out in the backcountry or being active or whatnot, and you're curious maybe about these different products because we all know it can be scary to test something new when you're used to using one thing and you don't want to risk like leakage or anything like that, that it's hard to make the switch. So Angie today will kind of guide us through some tips and tricks for different products at different times and whatnot. But I guess I want to get started with like what are your what's your go-to product, Angie? Do you have one like across the board for any activity?
Oh, I wish I could be that decisive, but for me, it really depends on activity. It depends on the environment I'll be in. There are certain types of sports or certain environments where I'm like diehard cup. I love my menstrual cup, but there are plenty of other times where I will forego the cup and go for the period panties. I would say right now I'm having a moment with period panties. I cannot believe I went several decades of my life, a couple of those being a menstruator, without knowing about period panties or really embracing them. They are amazing. So much more comfortable, so much less to worry about in a lot of circumstances. So if you're going to make me choose, team period panty.
I am so glad you said that because I also right there with you, like, late to the game in discovering these and thought that it was just gonna be a great kind of backup because I switched to a cup years ago, and that's been my main source, or whatever main thing that I use, but there's still times that I'm, like, worried about a leak or just those on either end of the cycle times that you want a little extra protection because 'cause you're like, "Okay, I don't want to use anything more, but I also, don't wanna have a leak." So I thought that's what they would be for, and then I'm right there with you that there's times where, "Oh my god, this is so nice to just not have anything in you, not have anything, like, just the feeling of pads and all that." So I I'm on the fence too. If I had to choose between cup or panties, what would it be? And I think I would have to go panties too. If you kind of
Nice.
take away or think about all the list of kind of pros and cons, which we'll get into, that there's a little less to deal with. Like if you got to change, just rip them off, whatever, deal with this later instead of worrying about where you're at when emptying a cup and all that like hygienic stuff. So yeah. I highly recommend all of you out there too. Give them a try if you haven't. And even if you're like me with getting into them of just wanting a little extra protection on either end of your cycle or like on a heavier flow day or something, that was a great introduction to them. And I did try a few different pairs. I've landed on this company called Salt right now,
Mm.
SAALT, and I thought there was a link. I'll put a link in the show notes for sure. But I keep getting emails from them too that they're now in Costco, which is I think cups and some of their panties. So one thing is the first pair of period panties I tried were Thinks, and because I thought like I saw them in the grocery store, I was like, you know what? I'm going in cheap. These are 15 bucks. I'm gonna give them a go before I invest because some of them are expensive, like regular underwear. Um, and I loved them, but they are also like kind of that particular quality because it's $15 in a box was is not the best. So it was a great intro. And now I'm like, yes, I will for sure buy into the better quality. So and Salt has so many different styles and they also have like discs and cups and all that stuff. So I would check those out for anyone interested. And also, yeah, if you want to grab the one in the grocery store or drugstore to give it a try first before you buy in, I would do it.
Yeah, I think $15 to experiment is well worth your money and your
Mm,
time. I think most people are going to be hooked when they realize how comfortable and easy they are.
absolutely. And so when these girls, my wrestlers kind of brought stuff up of like wearing pads, and honestly, I was wrestling so long, right, that and played other sports throughout my life. I just never thought about it. It was something I dealt with. We also weren't having those conversations. There wasn't a lot of other females wrestling, definitely that I was asking, like, what do you do? But I, in high school, like, found tampons quickly, and that was my go to because, like, yeah, I just did not like the feeling of pads. But these girls were, apprehensive about tampons. I'm like, oh my God, I cannot imagine wrestling, like, without one and only going like pad or something. And so I did mention to them there were a lot of other products out there. So maybe they could just start looking into them. And I told them to get on some different wrestling forums I know of. And that way they could talk with their peers that might be a little more comfortable, get some real, like, because I don't have experience using cup or panties like wrestling. I don't know. So I wanted them to be able to, yeah, talk to people their age of girls who have tried this stuff. But I was like, wow, yeah, you don't people don't like tampons, people don't like pads. Everyone has can have such a hardcore opinion on these different products. And my tier I think would be like, well, period panties, cup, and then tampons and pads because discs just don't fit me very well. But
I'm glad you
I'm
say that because everybody's body is different. And this comes into play in sports, whether it's teen sports or adult sports or kids sports. Everybody reacts differently to nutrition. Everybody has a different response to certain types of movement or even strength training, right? And so, of course, we all have different preferences and reactions to different menstrual products. You don't love discs. Some people I know will only use discs. There are disposable discs and there are reusable discs. There are so many combinations that every athlete needs to experiment with because when it comes down to it, if I could only say one thing on this entire podcast, it would be the more confident that your wrestlers or any woman or girl or anybody in sports, the more confidence that they can have in their body, the better they're going to perform. And part of knowing their body and understanding their body is their menstrual cycle and their confidence in all the pieces that go into managing a menstrual cycle. If you want to perform well, I think you need to be confident in this.
Absolutely, that's a really good point, and that stops us a lot, like women, like menstruating women, because again, when you don't feel comfortable in how something's going to happen, like am I going to have a leak here or there? How am I going to feel? Some women have very bad menstrual cycles, like with cramps or heavy flows, that nothing seems to work for them. They're just bleeding through. And so certain sports can be very uncomfortable, or just that their cramps are so bad that they're literally like, it's debilitating. They can't do the sport. We already see such a huge drop off. We've been talking about this lately on the podcast, but a huge drop off in adolescent, like middle school and high school age girls from sports in general. So, just another roadblock is simply menstruating, but there are ways to work around it. But the conversation is still just seen as taboo. It sucks. So, I want to break those barriers with as many like younger girls as possible, because like it didn't stop me then, but I know things could have probably been a lot better if those conversations were happening. So I want them to feel comfortable and confident talking about it too. And what's really cool about um, wrestling, particularly being like very male dominated, is there's a new certification out there that Wrestle Like a Girl, this nonprofit organization, started. That's a teal certification, and it's all about teaching people how to coach girl wrestlers. And a lot of like our male coaches in Truckee took that certification. So it does talk about, broaching the subject of menstruating and having pads and tampons in your medical kits, even extra pairs of underwear for on tournaments for those accidents. So even just the girls knowing like that is around and for them, they don't have to ask for it awkwardly from anyone or find another mom or something to ask it for. They know they can go to the med kit or the cabinet and they can find what they need. That's just like so empowering. And wrestling is not the only sport that has male coaches, right? A lot of sports across the board still have mostly male coaches, especially in the higher levels like college and whatnot. So I think all coaches need to have a little lesson in talking with women about periods, and not even just coaches, like men in general, how to have this conversation with women, because it's a natural part of life. It shouldn't be embarrassing ever to like pull out a tampon or buy something in the store, if you're still hiding like, oh, this, I have to freaking do my laundry at my boyfriend's parents, and period underwear, like you're not supposed to put in the dryer, so my underwear is just hanging from a damn hanger in the back room. But it's like, the more we have the conversations, the less taboo it is. And so all of us out there, I think we need to be able to talk about it, feel comfortable talking about it, because it makes us confident in life in general. You can walk into that freaking boardroom like, I don't care what's going on, like I'm comfortable. I'm not going to let my things that happen naturally like hold me back.
Yeah, Taryn, to your earlier point about hoping that by now in 2025, younger generations would feel more open and confident in these conversations, but at least in your experience, they're not. I do think part of that is because we haven't been talking with particularly men about how to talk about this, whether it's with their athletes, with their kids, with their friends. I was talking to Laura Borachevsky, who hosts the Sex Outside podcast recently, and we were talking about on Instagram, how you've probably seen these reels where you have women menstruating women menstruators going around with their little microphone, and they're finding men in the street and they're quizzing them on menstrual cycles. And the men don't know the answers to anything, right? They're totally clueless, and everybody laughs and pokes fun of them and whatever. And something about those reels feels a little bit sad, or they're not as progressive to me as I want them to be, because instead of actually educating the men and making them feel like it's okay to ask questions, we're teasing them for not knowing. But hello, when have these men learned this information? So I think we're coming at it, at least in social media and in a joking way, I think we're coming at this from a wrong space. I think we
Mhm.
need to be like your wrestling certification for coaching in schools, right? We need to be having real open conversations with male coaches or any type of male leader, outdoor guides. They need to know that it's okay to not know and to ask questions about menstruation, because most of the time they're ignoring it or they're hiding from those conversations because it's uncomfortable. The first way we can make this more comfortable is building it into curriculum. So I'm so stoked that your wrestling certification did that. That's like, yes, every sport, please do that.
Yeah, and just in school in general, talking about it more, like, 'cause it's just like everyone being able to talk about it without the joking manner always coming into it guides. So that's a perfect segue into the outdoor aspect because, like we mentioned, you see a drop off in sports from girls in these ages, and your period, menstrual cycle, whatever you want to refer to it as, that can definitely be barriers for people. Same with the outdoors, whether you've been in the outdoor, like were exposed to the outdoors at a young age, or maybe now, like, a as an adult, you're wanting to get into backpacking or biking and, like, longer trips, and you're like, "How do I do this?" Races, like, "How do I do it around my period?" Because also a thing which I don't know, I'm sure girls are still doing it, but I know one of my friends in high school did this. This was just around prom. I don't know if she did it wrestling. I actually did it too, now that I think about it, but with birth control, totally skipping the like placebo week and just continuing your pack constantly so that you didn't have a period at all, so you didn't have to deal with this stuff. So I'm sure elite athletes are still doing that, and that's because people are telling them like, oh, this will mess up your training cycle because your hormones change or your strength and this and that, and like, what a terrible way to deal with things. And so again, maybe you did this or you're trying to figure out, I want to go on a backpacking trip, but I might be on my period or something. Like, how do you deal with it? And I bet you have some great tips. I do want to talk about real quick a story. When I was in Alaska, like a week long kayak trip, and one of the girls on the trip was on her period. And so it was a real conversation about like what to store your garbage in, because we were staying at like Forest Service cabins and stuff, so it was like leave no trace, pack everything in, pack everything out. Also, grizzly bears. And how, people always saying like, oh, they're attracted to blood or whatnot. Like, people were honestly worried about that. And like, oh, we're camping, literally grizzly bears coming up on shore of this cabin we were staying in, and this girl being on her period, and like, is that a real threat or what? But she kept all of her trash in a bin. And I remember one of the other it was a group of us guides after the season who went, and one of the boys, he was like younger, but at this time I was still in my early 20s, but he was the youngest of all. He accidentally opened that like waterproof case of her empty tampons, and he was like horrified. He was like, oh my god, what is this? She's like, I'm packing it out, like, we can't leave any trash. What am I supposed to do with this tampon? I'm not throwing it in the ocean. So these are very real things in the backcountry. And do you have some tips for us of getting outside, how to kind of use these leave no trace principles, or what products might be best for some different situations?
Yes, and let's start by just settling the myth right now,
Yeah.
okay? There is no evidence that bears or wildlife of any kind is attracted to menstrual blood, so you can sleep easy in your tent. However, menstrual products are meant to be treated as smellable items in the leave no trace framework. So when we talk about smellable items, that means things like toothpaste. It means food, it means trash, it means any type of cosmetic, anything that has a scent to it. lump your menstrual products into that category too. That means if you're in bear country, you are hanging things in a bear bag. If you're in a campground that has a bear box, you're putting your menstrual supplies in there, just with the rest of your toiletries. So, no, bears aren't coming for you. But yes, treat your supplies like you would any other smellable item. So, there's that.
That's a very
I,
real
uh
quick. So when you mean smellable, like even before like being used, like fresh tampons and stuff, because they may have any kind of fragrance to them that could just like it would be interesting to wildlife because it's not, another pine tree.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, not all of us are using fragrance in our products, and I would actually advise against it because of chemicals. But there are still plenty of pads and tampons that have fragrance in them. But rule of thumb is to just keep all your toiletries as smellable items, even if you have an unused, unscented tampon. It's best practice to keep all of your toiletries together, and it just helps you from mixing things up, accidentally keeping your toothpaste out, whatever. So, I just like to tell everybody, rule of thumb, keep things in one place, treat them as smellable even if they're unscented.
Got it. Love that. Great tip.
Yeah. And then as far as products, I typically talk about four different types of products in the outdoors. We've covered period panties, which we are clearly both mega fans
Mhm.
of. And the reason why I like using these on certain outdoor activities is because, like you mentioned, Taryn, there are so many different styles and cuts and absorbencies. So you are bound to find a brand, a type, a cut that feels really good with the sport that you're doing. They're also very sustainable. You don't have to throw out anything. You just wash them. You can even wash period panties while you're on a backpacking trip. You can clean them like you would if you're rinsing a t-shirt or something, and then you can use the UV light from the sun to help sanitize it and reuse them again. They're also high absorbency, so you can go out for a long hike or you can sleep in your tent like I like to do and not have to worry about changing a product. But on the flip side, period panties are not very water sport friendly. So if you're into kayaking, boating, swimming, treat them like a pad. You probably won't want in overflowing with water pad or period panties. They're also heavier. If you're an ultra light packer, you might find that period panties are a little bit bulkier or heavier than perhaps just bringing a single cup, but that's only for the real gear nerds. In general, I think period panties are a great option.
I love that. And good point too, thinking about water sports or whatnot too, right? Like, because especially they can be so comfortable that 'cause it's not like having a pad on where you feel it like shifting or sticking to you in different ways or places that you might be tempted to just like, take off your shorts or whatever and jump in for a quick dip on a hot hike or something like that, remembering like, oh, wait, like that might not be the best option.
Mhm.
But
Yeah, I like to use period panties when I'm skiing, for example, because then I don't have to worry about, exposing my butt to the cold and the snow. So I'll choose period panties while skiing, but I'm going to use a cup when I'm going rafting or kayaking.
And that's the next thing. So, like I said, I've been using a cup for years now and I love it. And I've also tried like three different brands of cups. Again, these not all these things are cheap, right? So it's hard to try it out. It's hard to learn. Like there can be a learning curve to some, or they're gonna fit a little differently. Like I had the Diva cup to start. That was probably the one that most of us have heard of. It to me it was the first like major one hitting the market, the big brand, I guess. But honestly, I could feel it like riding a bike sometimes and like going over, especially my city electric bike that has zero shocks, that I'd be like, oh my gosh, like this is uncomfortable at times. And then so I tried a different brand that was a softer like material. I didn't feel it as much, but it had a longer stem, which was kind of annoying because it wasn't like the Diva cup where you could cut it. It was the Flex brand. And yeah, it still was just a little weird. I ended up using that one for the longest time because it felt the most comfortable in. And then Salt is the most recent one I switched to give it a try. I don't notice the stem at all, and I don't feel it as much as I did the Diva Cup, but it's odd sometimes when I shift and move, like, I literally feel it suction. Like, one time I had to, like, put it in quickly and, like, run to the bathroom, either readjust or whatever, like, threw it in, and all of a sudden, a couple minutes later, I had insane cramps. Like it
Mm.
felt like something was like squeezing. I was like, oh my God, like I almost doubled over. Like, what the heck is going on? And I like had to run to the bathroom, like pull it out. It was like the suction was like so intense that
Wow.
it like was painful. And so yeah, it's interesting because they say, that that's how it works is it suctions, but I've never felt the suction like I have in the salt cup. So sometimes I'm a little worried when I do it quickly of like, okay, is that gonna,
Mhm.
and I don't know, I may have like put it up too far also,
Mhm.
obviously, but it's been interesting to literally feel all the differences. So it does take some experimenting. And then there's also been times, I love the cup, but when you're in a place, which I am often, that you might not be able to like wash your hands and you got
Mhm.
to get up there to change it. So unlike a tampon where you can just pull it out by the long string and not have to touch anything, with a disc in a or a disc in a cup, you have to actually reach in. And so you got to prepare a little when you know you're going to have to change those items somewhere where there's maybe not like running water. How do you suggest people like prepare for that? Like
Mhm.
what do you just water bottle, wipes, what's your go-to?
Can I give you a cheat code first for anyone
Yeah.
listening? So, Taryn, like, good for you for doing the research on like what cup works best for my body. But I love pointing people to there's a website called Put a Cup in It. And this is where they gather so much, how does this brand fit? Is this one better for somebody who's given birth? Should I do rubber or should I do silicone? Does this one have a stem that I can cut? Can I cut this stem all the way off? So if you have an idea of what you're looking for or you don't know what your options are, Put a Cup in It is a great place to narrow it down so you don't have to buy as many as you did, Taryn.
Yeah. Well, to be fair too, I mean, this has been over the course of 4 or 5
Mhm,
years, and so it's been every couple of years that I've tried something new.
mhm,
Because I absolutely, when I first started the research of cups overall, I went to put a cup in it, but now there's just so many more brands, and they're all like, even in the grocery stores here in Truckee, there's a couple different brands just on the shelves, whereas before it was like only the Diva cup that I would
mhm.
see around. So and that's how I found Flex, was, well,
Yeah.
through a friend, and that put a cup in it. But yeah, now there's just, like I said, so many different brands, but that is a great resource, especially if it's your first time, to kind of narrow down and people actually have some reviews from you. But
Mhm.
yeah.
And also one other thing I find myself sharing with people that nobody ever knew about is so 25% of uteruses are actually tilted in your uterus in a different direction. I'm one of those 25% people. Had no idea until an OBGYN told me. In those cases, cups can often be more effective and have fewer leaks if you turn the cup inside out. So, usually, silicone cups are less firm than rubber and it's easier to do. But I noticed when I started using a cup many years ago that I would get leaks here and there. And I was like, but there's suction. Like, I can't figure out why. And when I learned the trick about for retroflex uteruses, turning the cup inside out, it stopped the leaks. So, there's another good one for people to try if they're struggling to find a cup that works.
Wow, that is so interesting because I also, that's why I've tried different ones, is because here and there like, especially the first day or something it seems, or the first time in my cycle that I'm putting it in, that it maybe doesn't suction all the way, and I've had some leaks. But I've also wanted to, like, next time every time I'm like, okay, next time I go to have like a OBGYN appointment, whatever, I really want to ask the doctor, like, can you let me know, like, if you have an idea of what cup or disc or something, because it frustrates me that discs don't work for me because I want to use
Mhm.
those more. But yeah, that's, so I'm very curious about that tilt now, and I wonder, but it seems so, is there any kinda, what was the reasoning, do you remember, of, like, why turning it inside out would work better?
From what I understand, it just slightly changes the suction and the way
Oh,
that,
okay.
the outer rim compared to the inner rim is going to just fit slightly differently under your cervix, so it just kinda changes the shape or the direction of the suction, and for some people, it works.
Got it. Yeah. This is definitely one of those podcasts where we don't have any straight answer for you. We're going to have our opinions and suggestions, but it's going to be a it depends episode. And no matter what, it is going to be trial and error. So, like, if you haven't tried any of these things and you need something different, just say, like, unfortunately, you got to suck it up and try some new options out there for yourself. But um,
Mhm.
so with cups or discs and changing those in a place where even a public restroom, right? That has multiple stalls and you have to come out and people get squeamish about that of like, okay, I just changed my cup, but now like how do I go exit the stall and like wash my hand without people noticing? Obviously, I would say like, you know what? You just gotta you're women, you're in the bathroom, we share the same experience. Like that that one's a little less, like, worrisome for me than preparing for, like, an outdoor activity where you might have to do something in the middle without a water source.
Mhm. Totally. Yeah, I mean, think about backpacking, right? You're gonna be peeing, you're gonna be pooping, and you might get your period too. And in all of those cases, especially pooping and periods, you want to have some sort of method of washing your hands, whether it's hand sanitizer or having running water or having, uh, when you're rafting and you have a pump that you can pump water and use soap. So ideally, you'll have a little squeeze bottle of soap with some purified water. Often, I'll just bring my Nalgene because I know that the water's been purified, and I'll bring a little squeeze bottle of soap, and then I'm able to wash my hands before and after I use my cat hole. Because if you're in a place where you're using cat holes for poop, you can also use that to empty your period blood. So that's kind of step number one, right? Is know where you're going to be. What are the environmental regulations in that particular area? Are you going to have access to cat holes? If so, you can probably just bring your poop setup with you and use it as a multi-purpose set of tools that you would with your menstrual cycle. If you're going to be somewhere that has a pit toilet, great. You're able to empty your blood into the pit toilet without putting your tampons down there, obviously. There are a couple things, a couple tools that can help in a pinch. One I love is the backcountry bidet. So it's like a little mini water bottle with a little spigot that comes out of it and it shoots high pressure water and it's just a bidet. But then you can use that to clean your cup. You can use it to clean your fingers, purified water, great option. In a super pinch, if you're like, I can't wash my hands at all, I like to keep an extra plastic glove. I know it's more high waist, rarely have to use it, but if you keep a plastic glove in your period kit, in your hygiene kit, then you at least have a backup option so that you can insert your fingers up into your vaginal canal and not have to worry about there being germs.
Also, I mean, I like that idea in general too because, like, first aid. So
Mhm.
and if you having just an extra pair of gloves around in your first aid kit when you're doing any of these activities, it's like there's just a you don't have to think of it as like, "Oh, extra waste," but, like, this could be a real, useful thing in an emergency, and whether it's like, your period or not. And you touched on so many so many things that I haven't even thought of because, 1, I haven't been a, like, backpacker hardcore in a while, or, like, in a decade, and I would never even have called myself, like, a hardcore backpacker or anything, and thinking about, like, digging cat holes and whatnot. I only had to do that, like, a couple times. So, those are things too that I just wouldn't think about with my period about so you think of it as just going, like, pee and not realizing or thinking about, like, "Oh, I should think empty my cup or disc or whatever in a certain place," especially because I think also all my experience in the past were with, like, pads or tampons. So, you're not emptying anything, you are just, like, going pee and then putting that product into a waste bag or something and packing it out. So, I love that you mentioned thinking of it more as, like, when you're gonna go poop, digging a hole, and that's where you would empty it out. And I love the extra glove tip and the backpacking bidet. I'm so glad you brought that up because I was wondering, like, "Oh, do you think that would be of
Mhm.
good use for this instance too?" So,
And they
it's
also have backcountry menstrual cup cleaners. So, say you finish your period while you're out on a long backpacking trip and you don't want to have your menstrual cup without it being fully cleaned or whatever. They have little containers that are small enough and lightweight enough to just stick your cup in it with some purified water, shake it around, and boom, you got a clean cup. So there are tools out there. There are also companies that make period packs. So you can, if you don't want to go around and build your own period setup and figure out which containers to keep your clean products in versus your used and all of that and customizing it, you can just buy some. And actually, I recommend that guides and outfitters buy some pre organized period packs that have all of these different tools within them so that if somebody unexpectedly gets a period on their trip and they don't have supplies with them, the guide can just hand them the pack and they're all taken care of.
I love that, and it's just so good to have. I'm one of those, I love to have all that kind of stuff on hand, the just in case, like, that's why I have a very I could never be a true ultralight backpacker or anything because I'm like, "Oh, no, what about, like, what if this happens? What if that happens?" kind of situation, um, but that's why I love also the fact that we do have all these different resources now and different products for periods because I never feel now that, like, I'm gonna be without something like, okay, well, I at least have a tampon around in, like, a little pocket of every, like, person and not even just for if I'm surprised, but if someone else is around that a freaking the bar or restaurant, like, "Oh my god," anywhere you're at, it just is one of those unspoken things between women of like, "Oh, gotcha, I gotcha," like, just like to have one on hand for anybody, but just these different products these days are just so much more comfortable to have too and not have to rely on that disposable thing.
Mhm.
With
But we should also be like, if you are a leader, whether you're a coach for wrestling, or if you are putting on a trail run, whatever it is, have those disposables just in case. I did 2 different 50K races last year where a woman approached me in the middle of the race on trail because we passed each other or whatever, and she asked if I had a tampon twice in 1 year. And I thought to myself after the second one, okay, from now on, even if I'm not on my period, I am bringing a tampon in my running vest on every single race because if this happens again, I want to be the person to be like, here you go figure it out. I know Trail Sisters, the organization for female runners, they have a Trail Sisters approved set of criteria for races. And one of them is that the race provides menstrual supplies at every aid station. So that's a look for a Trail Sisters approved race if you're looking for some more menstrual equity.
I love that. That's so cool
Mhm.
and such yeah, a good idea. Again, like just having it out there makes it more comfortable for everyone. A woman doesn't have to be worried in the middle of a race of like asking someone for a tampon or something and then can she knows like, hey, at the aid station there's going to be something for me. She can continue her race confidently like you mentioned in the beginning. Um so as we've talked about like emptying cups or discs in the backcountry and leave no trace principles. I am a little bit curious about discs and your take on them, and because I haven't tried this, and they say that with discs, like you can still have sex with your disc in, and it's always been a little bit confusing to me. Also, they empty when you pee. Is that right? Do you?
If you break the seal or the tension, yes. So I don't use discs often, but I've used them for travel, the disposable type, when I just know that I'm, for whatever reason, I decide I'm not going to bring my cup. I just want a disposable option and not have to carry extra gear. So the type I've used is disposable. It has the rigid rim and then a soft plastic, uh, tent to catch all of the blood. And so I'll stick a finger up, break the seal, and then I'm able to release the blood without taking the disc out entirely in the same way that you would a cup. But I'm curious, what's been your situation with them?
So they just for me they don't feel like they set it like they stay in place, and so I definitely am more apt to leak with a disc in, and maybe that's also why it feels like it like empties every time you pee. I don't know if I read that or if that's just been my experience because it's not the seal hasn't actually ever been there.
Mhm.
Because yeah, I'm like, how would it empty only when you like pee and not leak otherwise. But yeah, it's interesting to me and frustrating because they have been, like I said, the most comfortable because they don't go fully inside of you. So as I mentioned with the Diva Cup and other cups, I could feel it in certain positions, like especially on a bouncy road on a rigid bike, like I feel the cup like bounce against me. And with the disc, it was nice feeling like nothing's in there, but again, it doesn't set like behind what is it behind the cervix that it's supposed to catch. Um and so yeah, they don't sit in there, but I want to use them so bad. And then there's the reusable ones.
have you tried both reusable and disposable?
I've just tried the disposable,
Mhm.
and so I had been thinking about trying the reusable because again, like I said, Salt has them, and they're always like different sizes and can fit differently and whatnot. And
Mhm.
being, I'm sure silicone versus rubber, I would imagine that the disposable is probably not silicone.
I've heard that the reusable ones, I haven't tried one. I should just buy one. If there's a brand listening who wants to send me and Taryn a reusable disc, we'll give a review. But I've heard that they're a little bit more rigid so that they sit in some people's sit under their cervix a little bit better.
Yeah, and then with the being able to keep them in with like they say mess free sex, I don't, also I'm not quite sure how that all works, and we don't have to dive into
That's
that
worked
or
for me.
anything, but oh yeah,
I think, yeah,
like I
so
don't know.
if they do fit you correctly, right? And again, everybody's different, sizes are different, the reusable cups and possibly even or, discs and possibly the disposable discs come in different sizes. So if you find one that works for you and it's fitting correctly, then you are able to have intercourse without leaks, which is awesome, right? Like that is, I think, the biggest plus here is not having to worry about that. But again, it's going to take some trial and error. And unfortunately, that often means a little bit of a monetary investment.
Mhm.
But I do think that over time, after you experiment with, several cups, several different options, once you've made that initial investment to find out what works for you, great. You don't have to spend money on tampons anymore, right? Eventually it pays off in the long term.
It absolutely does. Um, so with this, talking about discs and how you can just kind of go up, like release the seal and empty it, then would you say for like backcountry, I don't know, I guess would it be less messy, do you think, with a disc versus a cup because you don't have to reach like all the way in and pull it out and worry about like washing your cup off too, but could release, like empty your disc if you were worried and be able to insert it easier than like pulling a disc in and out? Or I mean a
I
cup.
am really realizing from our conversation that I should just have a big disc experience for a
Yeah.
couple cycles and experiment with it and see. So, I think it's one of those things where Uh, you're gonna have to have your own experiment because even if I really end up loving a reusable disc, you might not ever, Taryn. And if you're
Yeah.
listening, you might or you might not. And so I can't tell you for sure. I will say, in general, it's all going to be pretty similar because of the way that you have to dispose of blood in the
Mhm.
backcountry. You're either going to have to pack it out if that's what the environment dictates, or you're going to have to put it in a cat hole, or you're going to have to throw it in the trash in the form of a tampon. So let the environment guide your choice, I think, and find something that's comfortable within those guidelines.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and just always being prepared with that, like, little personal hand washing station that you have, because even with a tampon or something, right, that you don't feel like you're really inside touching anything, you just, you never know what's gonna happen. Things can get messy. We know that it's okay. It's part of the process, but just being prepared and knowing where you're going. So the first step obviously would be researching kind of where you'll be, but not letting your periods stop you from going, and just being comfortable and confident and feeling like you have the tools to be comfortable and confident out there. And Angie, you've been very helpful in giving us some tips on what those tools might be. And now I kind of want to steer the conversation to where it all started with like my high school aged wrestlers talking about periods. And because we have a wide audience of listeners out there, whether you're experimenting yourself or you're in a position like me, like coaching these adolescent girls, a teacher, or an aunt or mom, like how to kind of broach this topic with young girls. Because for me, like I said, it happened naturally. The girls started talking about it because one was on her period. And would you say, kind of like wait for them to kind of bring it up, or obviously again it depends, right, on your relationship with said girl or whatnot, but I guess how can people feel comfortable talking about it, whether they're bringing it up or the young girls bringing it up?
Mm. I think you did a great job, Taryn, by seeing an in into the conversation and then opening it up for more discussion. I think in general, we put so much weight on having the capital T, the talk, right? Nobody wants the talk. How much better would it be for everybody involved if we had just casual little side mini talks over the years, starting young? So I think as casual as we can get with it and more frequent instead of putting all of this emphasis on one giant talk, the better. So think about, you're out in public with your 7-year-old and you see one of those tampon boxes in a public restroom and you notice that it's free as they should be, right? Maybe
Mhm.
you make a comment to that to your child that you're with, like, oh, look at this, like, have you noticed that some of these tampon boxes are free and some of them make you pay? What do you think about that? If you're out and you notice, the pair of underwear in the aisle and you're like, "Oh, $15 for a pair of period underwear. Have you seen these before?" Just start inviting kids, teens, preteens, invite them into the conversation casually as things come up. Maybe there's a commercial or a movie where there's a scene about menstruation, and that's another in too, right? It doesn't all have to be this super mega pressure of like, let's talk about periods. It can be sprinkled in into normal conversation. The younger, the better.
I love all of that because I feel like we come from a generation that was very much the talk, right? Like all this pressure is on the putting this one conversation, or also health class. Like you're like, oh, dodging a bullet because you're like, oh, you'll talk about that in health. I don't really have to talk about it, kind of thing. But yeah, making it not be this again taboo thing, making your whoever it is, your student, athlete, daughter, niece, anyone close in your like life, just not making it awkward in a whole thing, the casual conversation of it. And I still think even with amongst friends or adult women, like I said, that because of how we kind of grew up in it, it still feels a little like hush hush, like, hey, do you have a tam, like, you know? So being able to make it more casual for even just the younger generation, I think is very, very important. And I see too, so like we've got some notes here, right? And so Angie, you've mentioned like normalizing the language about talking
Mhm.
about it. I am curious what you mean by that. What kind of examples that are out there that might not be, you know, as casual, making it more of a thing. Like what do you think here?
Mhm. I called my period by a code word when I was in middle school and high school with my friends. That code word was dandelion, as in, I just got my dandelion. I don't know where that one came from, but it stuck. We had to call it dandelion because we felt too ashamed to call it by period or
Right.
menstruation or even bleeding, right? And this has been conditioned into us for many decades in society. How many times have you heard it called the curse, Aunt Flo?
Yeah.
Nobody wants to just call it what it is. And that is part of why we still feel shame as adults and why, at least now, people in their 30s, 20s, 40s, 50s, they're feeling more open, I think, generationally, because we're starting to see that this is bullshit that we've dealt with our entire lives. And the more that we can share language and resources, the better. But this hasn't trickled down to a lot of kids yet. So I think that we need to be role models in using our language to call this what it is. It's not a curse. It's not Aunt Flo. It is getting your period. It is menstruation. It's not your monthly visitor. I think if we can be really specific in all areas of health about calling it what it is, anatomically, physiologically, that sets up kids to be able to advocate for their bodies in the future. If we're calling things peepees instead of penis, vagina, ovary, what vulva, right? These are all different terms. And when a kid is having pain or discomfort, whatever it is, they will get help and healthcare if they can name what is actually hurting in the moment. Vulva versus vagina versus tummy. we need to know what these words are
Yeah.
for kids. So if we can start using anatomical words, no matter what age, I think that's huge. And neutralizing this too, right? We always talk about, oh, it sucks. I got my period. Or, yeah, suck it up. We just have to deal with it as women. What if we reframed that instead of using such negative language? What if we said, hey, this is a normal body function, just like digestion, just like breathing. And if we're talking about athletes again, the more you know about your breath, the more you know about your digestion, the more you know about your menstrual cycle, the better you're going to perform. So instead of seeing this as such a negative thing that we have to have code words for, what if we saw this as something we can use to our advantage? What if we saw it as a tool in our toolbox as athletes that we don't have to be ashamed of?
Amazing, amazing points. And yes, okay, totally got you there with normalizing the language and right code words. Like it I don't think I didn't have a code word, but it was always just like a, oh, I'm having lady problems or something,
Uh-huh.
right? Like covering it up like that. And so I'm just like, oh no, I'm in simply now, even still with my boyfriends, like, oh, I have cramps, like not like I'm on my period, I have cramps, just like, you'll get it. I don't have to say on my period, but it's like, but like why? Because I'm worried that he's gonna be uncomfortable when it's gonna be blatantly obvious. We live together. Like it's so interesting that we still just have a hard time just saying it and trying to disguise it when everyone knows what that disguise means anyways. Like at least
Mhm.
the people that you're talking to, that's not everyone around. But you know what, it's like even going to a regular gym, so like I do CrossFit, right? And I think that it's important even there for the instructors, they are called coaches, like them knowing and seeing that too, that like, oh, not you don't have to go tell your gym instructor, "Oh, I'm on my period and this is why this is happening," or anything, but it's just if we all know kind of what's going on, I think they can look at the people in the gym differently. Your instructors that you go to a lot at the gyms, they're paying attention. They know when something's kind of off, and I think it can be completely normal for them to and should be for them like, okay, yeah, this is what your performance looks like throughout the month. So they know too whether something's really wrong and how they can support you. Do they need to like kind of help you modify something, or do they know that like, oh yep, you're just kind of backing off because, and I don't know, I just think that being more open with it in general can helps everybody be able to look at their athletes and people in just a different way. It gives people grace instead of like, oh,
Mhm.
you're just being like lazy or this or that, right? That's like, nope, nope. Everyone's just going through something. And I think being a personal trainer and fitness like instructor, I'm not actively coaching or teaching or anything. That's very important to me. I really paid attention to what people were doing, and I could know like, all right, this day is not normal for them, but are they actually hurt, or do I need to help them modify, or do I just need to let them kind of back off today? Like your instructor isn't there to like be pushing you. I think that narrative is very old. I'm sure it still exists out there, but again, having these conversations, just being out, people being aware of how we can go through our cycles differently is very important, and that starts with talking about it.
Mhm. And okay, so obviously, right, we all need more research on menstrual cycles. We need a lot more research. If you're a researcher, remember that. The reality is, the research that we have now shows that you can perform your best at any time of your menstrual cycle. VO2 max, all like you can get a personal best in whatever your sport is premenstrually, during your period, after your period. It doesn't matter. That said, a lot of people do struggle with really tough symptoms that can get in their way of feeling their best and therefore trying to perform their
Mhm.
best. And if we can treat the period as a vital sign, because it is, then coaches will know what is normal versus what is healthy versus what is common, right? There's a difference between something commonly happening and it being normal and healthy. So, yeah, it's pretty common that you'll see athletes miss periods because they're overtraining and underfueling. Is that normal? Is that healthy? No.
Mhm.
Is it common for people to have really long, really heavy periods? Yes. Does that make it healthy? Does that make it normal? No. And so if our coaches, if our leaders can understand the difference between what is actually healthy and what is a signal of a deeper problem, that's going to help these athletes get to the root of what's causing these symptoms way faster instead of them suffering in silence or letting it get in the way of getting those personal bests because they have to take a nap or lie down because of cramps. Like, yeah, there's a long way to go, but I think conversations like this, as you're saying, are getting us closer.
There's definitely a long way to go, and there's so much information out there. Our last conversation, we talked about kind of cycle syncing a bit in a way, not just with performance or in training, but like in life, right? Kind of just, and not, I wouldn't even say like syncing, like you can only do this at this point in your cycle, but being aware of what is happening in your body and mind during certain cycles. But that also ebbs and flows. It's not going to be the exact same. I try to pay attention all the time, but there's times where, like, according to, what someone says over here, this week I should be at my max, like, endurance and strength and this and that, but I still feel like dog shit. Well, what else is going on in my life? You don't have to put all of the weight on these things, but it still just brings awareness to like what's happening in your life and in your body. And I think that awareness overall, anyone, even men, just being aware of, hey, how did that lack of sleep or eating that shitty food like affect you the next day or two, especially if you are a person who works out regularly or trains or something. You really can start to notice these trends, and that helps you like become a healthier person, because like you just mentioned, and I love that you brought it up, that because something's common doesn't mean it's normal. And with women specifically, we this is why we don't get a lot of help and answers, is because you go to a doctor, you're like, this is happening, and like, oh, that's very common, and it's like just swept under the rug because they don't know how to answer or approach it either. And I think that's the biggest red flag, is if a doctor or healthcare provider says, "Oh, that's common," but doesn't actually give you any kind of solution, and
Mhm.
doesn't sit there and try and have a conversation with you to help you figure it out, then, like, red flag with that person. Maybe try somebody new, because just, "That's common, here, try this," like, "Take this pill," or, "Try a little extra sleep or a heating pad," right? It's like, no, no, we can dive into deeper things, but
Mhm.
because there's not enough research around it. But what gets more research around it is, yes, having these conversations and talking about it, kind of forcing the issue. And that's just what has to happen, is we have to force the issues, which can feel like it sucks, because why do we have to force it? And men don't have to over here or there. It's just like, we just do. We have to make
Mhm.
change, we have to force issues, and it is tiring, it's exhausting, but you can't just we can't just be content. If you really want to solve your problems, you have to go in there full force and make people listen to you.
Mhm. Having conversations about taboo topics is a form of advocacy. And this type of advocacy that we're doing right now by talking about this, it's not just to help everybody and lift up the whole community. It also helps us advocate for ourselves. Data is knowledge, knowledge is power, power is empowerment. The more data we can collect and interpret around our own individual bodies, the more we can advocate for ourselves at the doctor. If you listen to our last episode together, then you heard about my experience with my birth control almost killing me. And there were several points along the way, both in my own conversations and in my conversations with doctors, where somebody could have caught my series of problems before I had a life-threatening experience. And so yeah, but we need to start on an individual level, understanding our bodies, becoming body literate, and we also need doctors to start listening to our stories more and finding these yellow flags and red flags more.
And yeah, so I think all of us out there, all of you listening, so if some of you are comfortable talking about it, great, talk more. If you're not, like, start small conversations with your like closest friends or something. Try to find some comfort in talking about it, because like you said, Angie, it's advocacy, and the more we can feel comfortable talking about it, the better, and the better for our, like, the generation under us, right? Like, if you're still hearing, mom or aunt so and so, like, say Aunt Flo or this or that, and feel uncomfortable talking about it, then yeah. And so think about it that way, if it helps you. Like, if my daughter was in this situation, or my niece or granddaughter, whatever, how would I want, the doctor or person of authority to handle it for them. You wouldn't want them to take any shit, right? So why is it okay for you to do it? Um, and we, again, there might be many of you out there listening who have issues like cysts or endometritis and all these issues that, again, you're getting kind of shooed away or stuffed under the rug because your doctor's just saying like it's common, like it we know more now that it's common, yes, but not normal, right? So how do we find resources? It's not like just talk to each other, try and find the people who will listen to you. They are definitely out there, but it can be hard to find. But because I know that there's so many of you listening probably that just at this point in life just deal with it because like, oh, I've dealt with it my whole life. Like, so what? Doesn't mean you still have to. Like, you can still use your voice even if you've dealt with something most of your life. There's still room for change. And like I said, put yourself in some position of thinking like, if this was your daughter or niece or something having the problem, or your friend, you wouldn't stand for it, right? So why are you letting yourself be okay with it? And we do that a lot as women, which Amber and I talk about a lot on this podcast, is like, we when it comes to ourselves, we're not putting ourselves first, right? We're putting others first. So we have to treat ourselves like we're our best friend, and we won't let anyone give them shit. So just remove yourself from yourself for a minute and go figure some things out, try new things, talk about it. And I sure hope that we can normalize the conversation a little bit more, little bits at a time, so that we can just get more education and research out there.
Cheers to that. For sure. Don't really have anything to add other than you'll have 400 menstrual cycles on average in your lifetime. So whether you are done with most of those, if you are done with most of those, you can still improve a handful more, or you can improve them for the future generation.
And I think that's a great, like, we won't dive into this topic, but going in and like menopause, same thing. One of the CrossFit coaches at my gym, his wife is kind of starting in that age, and he's mentioned and talked publicly about it, like how much he's learning about it just because of his wife, and how he's realizing that a majority of the athletes at that gym are going through those life stages, and that makes him look at the women in the gym so much differently, and it helps him understand so much more about what is going on. Like, so it's not just the like, oh my goodness, like Susan over here is just being lazy today type thing. And so yeah, like, not to say that we should care what others think or whatnot, but it just creates more understanding in our world in general. And that's at a kind of a surface level talking about the gym, but this will help talking about women in all stages of life. We're talking about particularly menstrual, but we know what the next stage is, perimenopause and menopause. Then like, we need to have those conversations too, to help the everyone around us in the world understand like women, why we are the way we are, what kind of is going on, not just the crazy witches that you burn at the stake. Like,
Mm-hmm.
like, this is something that everyone needs to understand, and we have to be able to talk about it. And these are why also it can hold women back from getting leadership roles, because men and other people say like, oh, women are emotional, they're at this stage of life, so they can't handle this stress or something. Like, we can handle anything at any stage of life. So don't let whatever stage you're in stop you from continuing to go for what you want. And we can help ourselves feel more confident in that, again, for the millionth time, by having these conversations.
Hell yeah. Nailed it.
Okay, Angie, before we get out of here, I'd love for you to tell listeners again, too, for those who are new or who have forgotten, where they can find you. And you have a podcast of your own, too. So you all should check out For the Love of Pod with Angie as well. But I'll let her tell you the information on connecting with her and listening to that.
Yeah, if you're most interested in exploring all of my menstrual cycle resources, I have two places. One is I have a book, the Cycle Syncing Handbook, and it's probably different than the type of cycle syncing you see on Instagram or TikTok a little bit. So you can go find that at www.itsangemarie.com/book. I also have a Substack. I come out with a new post every Tuesday. It's free. And I am going to be weaving a lot more menstrual cycle ideas in there. That is bloodsweatfear.substack.com. And if you want to listen to the podcast that Taryn mentioned, that's fortheloveofpod.com. We talk to adventurous people about the big trade-offs and pivots they've made in life in order to pursue their passions. So just like just like Taryn and a lot of you, I am a multi-passionate human being and got my hands on a lot of different projects.
I love it, and here for it. And I think it's just always inspiring to hear more people wear a lot of different hats. Because, like I said, we always hear focus on one thing or something, and there's a time and a place for that. But just know that you can have multiple passions and do a little bit of it all. My biggest thing to all you out there is just always remember, if you want to do it, do it. Give it a try at least, because then you'll know where it can fit in your life or if it fits in your life or not. So I'm all for trying anything that you can dream of. And Angie, thank you so much for coming on and sharing some wisdom about periods, period product, periods in the backcountry. I hope you all out there learned a little something. And again, we can go out there and talk about this and not be ashamed of it. So I hope you all have a great rest of your day, week, whatever, and we will talk to you next week. Bye. We hope you enjoyed this episode and would do us a huge favor, since we don't have any sponsors or anything like that, and would rate and review us on whatever platform it is you use, Spotify, Apple, Stitcher, whatever it is. And if you're listening and downloading just through the website, tearingituppodcast.com, leave comments. We'll definitely engage back with you. And on social media right now, we're just on Instagram. Tearing It Up Podcast is the handle. Like the post, share the post, comment on the post, whatever it is you got. Show us your love so we just stay relevant and show up in the rankings at all. So again, rate and review, please. And we'll see you next time. Thanks.